Hello, everybody. Today, I want to share with you the history of Veronica Lalley, many of yours aunt or great aunt, or another relationship that um, you may have known her in her later years, and we'll get to that late at the end. But it seems to be that many of you don't actually know what her life was like when she was younger, and just how brightly she shone. And so today I want to go through that with you so that you can be as amazed as I am. So my first thing to show you is here is her beautiful face on the Denver Post in on 1938, January 8th, titled Valorous Veronica. And so this is going to be a series of news articles, by the way, because it's all in the news. And I'm just going to read it to you because I feel like it's very powerful and important. And so I'm going to share. Okay. So, uh, Dolores Veronica, who was just as scared as anybody, wouldn't let any of the other occupants of a plane be panicked when the ship kerblumped into a swamp 3 miles from the Newark airport in a storm at night. Veronica laughed it off and had the 5 passengers laughing too while they waited for assistance, which was 4 hours getting there. Large bouquets of expensive flowers were going forward to Veronica Saturday with the applause of the passengers. They said Miss Veronica Lalley, stewardess on the plane, was the heroine of the occasion. Um, so that is the shining moment. And the question you may be wondering is, how did we get here? So let me tell the backstory. First, let's go to her high school graduation, where she graduated from Sycamore High School, and she was the valedictorian. Class of 83, she was in first. And that was already an impressive start. But where she really starts to get noticed is a couple of years later, August 8th, 1937. She's featured in the Rockford Morning Star as an air host from Sycamore. Miss Veronica Ann Lalley, daughter of the John J. Lalleys of 226 West Charles Street, Sycamore, managed to convince the American Airlines Personnel Office that she'd make a good air stewardess, despite the fact that she's only 5'1" and weighs only 107 pounds. And now she's flying on the company's big flagships between Chicago and New York. That's the caption on the picture. And to go through the article, petite stewardess wonders what difference 5-foot stature makes if you're 8,000 feet in the air. Veronica Ann Lalley of Sycamore, Illinois, believes that if you are up 8,000 feet in a Skyliner flying nonstop from New York to Chicago, it doesn't matter particularly whether you're tall or not. And if you don't weigh very much, why, that would seem to be all the good. But you'd be amazed at the difficulty Veronica Ann encountered in convincing the American Airlines of those points. And finally, it was pluck and her pleasant persistency, accompanied by proof that she was a good air sailor, which won the airlines over to making a special exception for a young woman who measures just 61 inches in height and weighs just 107 pounds. So Veronica Ann Lalley is now a full-fledged stewardess on one of the 21-passenger American Airlines flagships, which skim from Chicago to New York and back in no time at all. And she admits that she is far prouder of that triumph than when, a few short years ago, she stood on the platform at Sycamore High School, a wee mite of a miss, as valedictorian of her graduating class, a Janesville student nurse. But we're way ahead of our story. Miss Veronica Ann, who is now Stewardess Lalley, is the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. John J. Lalley, 266 West Charles Street, Sycamore. After graduating from high school with honors, she took up nurse's training at Mercy Hospital, Janesville, Wisconsin. She was graduated there in 1936 and for the past year has been on nursing duty. Meantime, she had watched the big sky ships pass overhead, winging their way over hometown to western ports and over Janesville on fabulous runs to the northwest, and had decided that she wanted more than anything else to fly and be part of the fascinating adventures of air transport. But the measuring rod kept telling her persistently that she was 61 inches tall, and the scales refused to deviate from 107 pounds. Blonde hair, blue eyes, a charming smile. These were all well enough, but they didn't get you on a Skyliner when the rules said quite definitely that there were rules on weight and height, which, like the laws of the Medes and Persians, didn't change. She didn't give up. But Miss Veronica Ann Lalley is not the type to let a little thing like lack of stature or weight halt her ambition. She packed an overnight bag for Chicago and bearded the personnel office of American Airlines in their very den. They were pleasant, a bit vague, awfully discouraging, but they had met a persistent young woman, and finally they yielded to the extent of letting her take the requisite tests, and that done, of letting her take a trial flight from Detroit to Chicago and back. She proved that she was not only perfectly adequate to be a stewardess, but was an exceptionally good air sailor. So for a month, she has been studying in the American Airlines stewardess schools, and last week won her wings, as well as a place on one of the Americans' proudest ships, a big flagship. Stewardess Veronica Ann Lalley, as charming and capable a hostess as American has, still thinks it's a little silly to measure merit by height and weight, and sometimes, watching her capable administrations aloft, the Pontifical Personnel Office must think so too. So how great is that? She wanted to become an airline stewardess. She was told she can't because of her size, and she just badgered them into letting her do it anyways by proving that she could do it. I mean, I don't know. I think that's awesome. And so keep in mind that was August 1937, and then just a few months later, January 1938, we get the event. This is an article from the Seattle Daily Times, but as you can see, there are articles from dozens of newspapers. I found 38 articles so far from North Carolina to Seattle to New Jersey to Oregon to Chicago, but I'm sure there are more that I didn't find. Airliner down in swamp, near Newark, 8 rescued. This is in the Jersey Journal. A transport airliner whose pilot undershot his mark in an early morning rainstorm bounced to a forced landing in a treacherous swamp near Newark Airport today, but settled into mud and water with its 5 passengers and crew of 3, little the worse for their dramatic experience. Isolated for 4 hours in the 8-mile square marsh until rescuers in dawn brought them aid, the water-soaked and mud-stained passengers merely wisecracked about their narrow escape. After trudging through knee-deep mire to dry land, they laughed about it all, paid rosy compliments to the pretty blonde stewardess who stayed by their side during the hectic landing. All the raves go to Veronica Lalley, said Jack Ryan of Evanston, Illinois, one of the 5 men who flew in on the giant plane from Chicago. She's aces. She kidded us all into thinking we were coming into the airport, got our coats ready and everything. She's a peach of a girl, echoed A.R. Watkins of Chicago, making his first flight. She got us out in nothing flat. The American Airlines plane was due at 2:39 a.m., came down to its muddy berth about 3 a.m. Quickly after it bounded to a stop, Miss Lalley herded the passengers out in the rain until danger of explosion was past. From then until daylight, they stayed inside the protecting cabin, waiting for help. Pilot Usher Roush of Chicago plunged through the marsh in the dark to the airport 3 miles away, led a rescue party back to return the passengers to safety. I'll just pause to remind you, this is before radar. So if people didn't know where your plane was, they weren't going to know. There was no way for them to know that. Roush suffered a cut over one eye in the bumpy landing, but none of the others, the airline said, was injured. After walking through mud and water to the airport, the passengers warmed up on hot coffee and sandwiches and went up to New York by automobile, apparently none the worse for their experience. Passengers were Jack Ryan, William Ogilvy, and A.R. Watkins, all of Chicago, Mike Lunder of Boston, and Herbert Shapiro of Newton, Massachusetts. Beside Roush, the crew consisted of Stanley Gerding, co-pilot, and Veronica Lalley, air stewardess, both of Chicago. Watkins, who gave his address as 733 Yates Avenue, said he was praying hard when the big airliner first hit the soft ground, but was confident everything would be all right after we bounced the 3rd time. Misjudged airfield. Roush, near exhaustion, asked after his trek through the swamp in the rain, said he misjudged the position of the runway because of the low visibility. The official airport report gave the visibility at the time as 3/4 of a mile and the ceiling as 2,000 feet. Airline officials said conditions were variable and indefinite, however. The 8-ton plane, due here at 2:39 a.m. after a flight from Chicago with stops at Detroit and Buffalo, sailed 3 feet in the mud after the abrupt landing. Its position was in the middle of an 8-mile square swamp south of the airport. The soft landing place was credited by airport officials with saving a bad crash that probably would have resulted in fatalities. To get the plane out of the swamp, the airline said it would be necessary to dismantle it and bring the parts in on skids. The crew knew before the forced landing there might be trouble, they said, and Miss Lalley, a pretty blonde and graduate nurse of Mercy Hospital, Janesville, Wisconsin, took appropriate steps. She fastened all the passengers into their seat belts, into their seats with safety belts, served tea and crackers and cheese. Immediately after the plane came to a halt, she routed everybody out until danger of explosion had passed. So just quickly, it's not much changes. If you want to calm people down, serve them food. Turns out it's next very helpful survival skill. Praise for pilot. The passengers were very nice, she said. There was no excitement. As for myself, I had no time for excitement. I was too busy. When word of the plane's flight reached the airport by radio, T.A. Schmidt, operations manager of American Airlines, and Sergeant Ben Herman of the 119th Observation Squadron, New Jersey National Guard, donned hip boots and forged into the swamp. They shot off very pistols, which I think are like flares, to show them the way and sent up more flares to attract other searchers when they reached the ship. The plane's own flares were useless, buried in the mud. Roush, the airline said, had been with the company 9 years, had 9,000 hours flying to his credit. All of the passengers praised him for his work at the controls in the emergency. En route to New York by bus, the passengers joked about their experience and agreed they were cool and calm about it all. Watkins, making his first air trip, suggested, and the others agreed, they form a belly floppers association. The pilot told them, she said, the plane was going 125 miles an hour when it touched the ground. Lunders and Shapiro had been attending the National Shoe Fair in Chicago. Both said they intended to fly on to Boston tomorrow. Ogilvy, associated with the International Air Show to be staged in Chicago, remarked it, quote, all happened too fast to worry, and added he was glad we bounced instead of crashing. So I find this all amazing. I find this whole story amazing, right? Because she forced her way into American Airlines by demonstrating that she had the ability to do the work of an air stewardess despite their misgivings. And then she proved that she had that mettle and ability by not only in surviving a plane crash, but being noted as a hero in the plane crash for keeping the passengers calm, for ushering them through the necessary steps that they had to go through. So she had to evacuate the airplane with them so that because they were worried about it exploding. And then after they decided it wasn't going to explode anymore, getting everyone back in and calm and ready for the search parties and preventing the whole thing from turning into a nightmare scenario. And so I think it's very impressive. And so did the whole country, right? Because like you can see, we have articles coast to coast. This one's Chicago Daily News. This one's the Denver Post, which I showed you before. This one's Rockford. This one's New Jersey. This one's the Morning World Herald. That's Omaha. Cleveland, Seattle. This is what the plane looked like. And these are just the articles I pulled. There are dozens more that are from places like North Carolina and New Orleans. So for a period of time, because of Veronica's mettle during an air accident, she was the face of the Lalley family. She was the one in the news. She was asked to do promotional work for American Airlines. She was the famous one. deservedly so. And so um, that brings us to her wedding story, which is shown here. Saturday, October 26, 1940, which is 2 years later, so she's still notable. She'll join the November brides. An airway romance will lead Miss Veronica A. Lalley to the altar next month, where the attractive young air stewardess is to marry a Tennessean who is interested in the airways of radio. Miss Lalley's parents, Mr. and Mrs. John J. Lalley of Sycamore, have announced that their daughter will be married in November to James S. McMurry, son of Mr. and Mrs. William McMurry of Nashville, Tennessee. The prospective bridegroom is a radio announcer for the Mutual Broadcasting Company in Nashville, and after the marriage, he and his bride will make their home in that Tennessee city. The bride-to-be was graduated from Sycamore High School and from the Mercy Hospital School of Nursing in Janesville, Wisconsin. After her graduation at Mercy Hospital, she was employed for several months at Cook County Hospital, Chicago. In 1937, she became a flying stewardess for American Airlines. And so this is when she marries her husband, James McMurry. As many of you know, afterwards, it turned out to be an unhappy marriage, and so things started going awry, which will then bring me to. So I asked JC about it a little bit, and he gave me some background, which I think is really helpful. I think this is sort of the story that the next generation sort of grew up with her. Your grandfather, Edward Lalley, always had a special care for Veronica. He was the baby, and Veronica was just 2 years older. Sister Mary Patricia, Mercy Nunn, and Sister Anna Lalley, your great grandmother, was at a hospital in Janesville, Wisconsin. That is where Veronica trained in nursing. It's also where Gerald Lalley trained for X-ray. Her marriage ended unhappily and she had a nervous breakdown. Your grandfather called the family together at our house. I was just a kid and took charge of her care at a facility. Afterwards, she lived with us for a while, sharing a room with my 3 sisters. We did not have a big house. Veronica played the violin every morning for therapy. It drove us crazy. However, she was blissfully unaware of our annoyance. She was kind and gracious. She lived in Hyde Park, Chicago for a while, then moved to Jackson Heights in New York. She had a son, Bill McMurray. He went to Annapolis, was a captain in the U.S. Navy, and then went into the defense industry. He and his wife both died of cancer, very sadly. So in showing you this is the side of her life that I think that you all knew, your generation. And it is sad. It's very sad. But it's important to remember that that's not all that it was, right? That there was this whole side of her that you may not even known about. It's a very impressive side. I hope that by going through all this, going through her experiences when she was younger, changes your perspective on her, and that you see her for what she was. Finally, here's a picture of the John J. Lalley family with kids. Here's Veronica right here next to her brother and my grandfather and your father, Ed Lalley. And with that, I will close up this video.